August 20th, 1943. A dusty road outside the small occupied town of Brest. The afternoon air smelled of salt from the nearby Atlantic and diesel fumes from German trucks grinding along the road. Overhead, gulls screamed as they circled the gray harbor where U-boats slipped silently in and out under heavy guard. On that road, a thin 14-year-old girl pedaled slowly along on a rusted blue bicycle. Her name was Simone Segouin, though the German soldiers stationed around the region would never have recognized her if they heard it. To them, she was just another village girl, a child carrying bread and vegetables in the basket tied to the handlebars. Her dress fluttered in the warm wind. Her braids bounced lightly against her shoulders as the bicycle rattled over small stones. Nothing about her looked dangerous. That was exactly the point. 2 kilometers ahead, a column of trucks belonging to the German occupation army was scheduled to pass along the same road. Inside them would be officers and communications staff heading toward the naval headquarters. If the convoy reached the base safely, dozens of new defensive positions along the coast would be reinforced. If it didn't, Simone pedaled a little faster. The basket on the front of her bicycle looked ordinary enough. A loaf of bread, a folded cloth, a few vegetables. Hidden underneath them was a compact metal device wrapped in wax paper. A British explosive charge. Small, precise, deadly. The plan had been whispered to her only that morning inside a dark cellar used by members of the French resistance. A tall resistance fighter known only as Marcel had leaned over the table, pointing to a hand-drawn map. "The Germans believe children are harmless," he told her quietly. His finger tapped the road. "They will not search you." Simone had listened without interrupting. Across the room, several older fighters watched her nervously. Some of them were in their 20s. Others had already fought in the French army before the country collapsed in 1940. And now a 14-year-old girl was about to do something none of them could safely attempt. Marcel pushed the small explosive device toward her. "Right ahead of the convoy," he explained. "There is a culvert beneath the road near the stone bridge. Place the charge there." Simone picked up the package carefully. "How long is the fuse?" 4 minutes. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she calculated the distance in her head. 4 minutes to plant it. 4 minutes to ride away. 4 minutes before a line of Nazi trucks would drive over the exact point where she had been standing. The room fell silent. Finally, one of the fighters spoke. "She's too young." Simone looked at him calmly. "The Germans don't think so," she replied. Now, hours later, she was alone on the road. Ahead, the stone bridge came into view. The culvert lay just beneath it, a narrow tunnel where rainwater drained beneath the road before flowing into the fields. Perfect for hiding explosives. Simone stopped the bicycle beside the bridge and leaned it gently against the railing. For a moment, the world seemed quiet. Wind through tall grass. Distant waves hitting rocks. A crow calling somewhere far away. Then she knelt beside the culvert and reached into the basket. The wax paper crackled softly as she unwrapped the explosive. Her hands moved quickly now. The charge was magnetic, designed by British operatives to stick to metal surfaces or bridge supports. She pressed it against the stone inside the culvert and twisted the small timer. Tick, tick, tick. For minutes. Simone grabbed her bicycle and jumped back onto the seat. She pushed hard on the pedals and began riding away. Her heart hammered as the seconds slipped by. Behind her, the road curved through a line of trees. Ahead, a narrow dirt path led toward a field where she could disappear before the convoy arrived. But just as she reached the turn, she heard something. Engines. Loud. Closer than expected. Simone looked over her shoulder. Through the trees, she saw the first German truck already approaching the bridge. The convoy was early, much earlier, and suddenly the 14-year-old girl realized something terrifying. She still hadn't escaped the blast zone. August 20th, 1943. The road outside Brest. Simone's legs froze for a split second. The first German truck was already visible between the trees. A gray military transport rattling forward with its canvas cover snapping in the wind. Behind it came another, and another, a full convoy, much earlier than anyone in the French resistance had predicted. The ticking charge beneath the bridge suddenly felt much louder in her mind. For minutes. But now the trucks would reach the bridge in less than one. Simone forced herself to breathe. Panic would kill her faster than the explosion. She pushed hard on the pedals again, turning sharply down the dirt path that cut through a wheat field. Dust sprayed behind her wheels as the bicycle rattled violently over ruts in the ground. Behind her, the sound of engines grew louder. Metal clattered. Soldiers shouted. She didn't dare look back again. The plan had never included this possibility, that the convoy might arrive while she was still nearby. If the explosion happened too soon, the Germans would see exactly where it came from. And they would find her. Simone pedaled harder. The wheat around her was tall, nearly reaching her shoulders as she rode through the narrow farm track. Golden stalks whipped against her legs and dress. Every second mattered now. 30 seconds passed. Behind her, the convoy rolled closer to the bridge. Inside the lead truck, a German officer leaned forward from the passenger seat. His name was Karl Richter, a signals commander responsible for coordinating coastal defenses near the Atlantic Wall. He had spent the entire morning arguing with naval officers about radar installations. Now he simply wanted to reach headquarters. "Bridge ahead," the driver muttered. Richter nodded lazily. Through the windshield, he saw the narrow stone bridge crossing the small drainage culvert. A harmless rural road. He never even noticed the bicycle leaning against the railing. Behind the lead truck came 2 staff transports filled with officers and communications specialists. Maps, coded radios, and orders for coastal artillery units were stacked inside metal cases. If the convoy reached Brest safely, dozens of German defensive batteries would soon be repositioned. But beneath the bridge, the explosive charge ticked toward zero. 2 minutes remaining. Simone's lungs burned as she pedaled through the wheat field. The path curved toward a line of hedges ahead. Beyond them lay another road where she could vanish into the countryside. But the bicycle was slowing. The rough dirt track was stealing her speed. Her mind raced. 2 minutes. The convoy would reach the bridge in seconds. And she was still dangerously close. Behind her, the first truck climbed onto the stone bridge. Richter glanced casually out the window. For a brief moment, he noticed something odd. A bicycle abandoned beside the railing. His brow furrowed. "Warum steht das Fahrrad hier?" he muttered. "Why is that bicycle here?" The driver shrugged. "Probably a local farmer." They rolled forward. Under the bridge, the charge reached the final seconds. 10, 9, 8. Far across the field, Simone finally reached the hedgerow and threw herself off the bicycle, dragging it into the tall grass. She dropped to the ground and covered her head. 7, 6, 5. Back on the bridge, Richter leaned forward slightly, still staring at the empty bicycle. Something about it bothered him. 4, 3. Then he saw the small wire hanging beneath the railing. His eyes widened. "Halt!" 2, 1. The explosion tore the road apart. The stone bridge erupted in a violent blast of fire, dirt, and shattered masonry. The lead truck lifted off the ground as the shockwave ripped through its chassis. The entire vehicle flipped sideways and slammed down into the collapsing culvert below. Behind it, the second truck drove straight into the expanding cloud of debris. A second explosion followed as its fuel tank ruptured. German officers were thrown violently against the steel frames inside the vehicles. Radios smashed. Ammunition crates burst open. The quiet countryside turned into a thunderous inferno. Across the field, Simone felt the ground shake beneath her chest. Dust rose into the sky like a storm cloud. For a long moment, she stayed completely still. Then slowly, she lifted her head. Black smoke poured upward from the shattered bridge. Burning trucks lay twisted in the wreckage, and terrified German soldiers were crawling from the ruins, shouting, wounded, disoriented. The convoy had been completely destroyed. Simone stared at the scene in stunned silence. Dozens of officers had been inside those vehicles. Then a terrible realization struck her. Survivors were already climbing out of the wreckage, and they were looking around, searching. August 20th, 1943, minutes after the explosion near Brest. The countryside that had been quiet only moments earlier was now filled with chaos. Black smoke curled into the sky above the destroyed bridge. Flames licked at the torn canvas of overturned trucks, while burning fuel spread across the shattered road. German soldiers stumbled through the wreckage, coughing and shouting. Some were wounded. Others were in shock. A radio operator crawled from beneath twisted metal, his uniform smeared with blood and soot. He dragged himself toward the ditch, clutching a broken headset. "Sabotage!" someone shouted in German. Partisans. A surviving sergeant staggered to his feet beside the wreck of the second truck. His helmet had been blown off, and his ears rang violently from the blast. He looked around the destroyed convoy and realized the scale of the disaster. Officers lay motionless across the road. Maps burned. Radios crackled uselessly. Nearly half the convoy had been caught directly in the explosion. And then the sergeant saw something. The bicycle, still leaning against the bridge railing, untouched by the blast. His eyes narrowed. "De Drubin!" he shouted, pointing. Several soldiers rushed toward it immediately. They inspected the basket, the handlebars, the worn tires. It looked like the bicycle of a village child. But now it was evidence. Whoever planted the bomb had left it behind. And whoever they were, they could not be far away. "Spread out," the sergeant ordered. "Search the fields." Within seconds, German soldiers began fanning out across the countryside surrounding the ruined bridge. Boots crushed through wheat fields. Rifles were raised. The hunt had begun. Across the field, hidden behind a thick hedgerow, 14-year-old Simone Segouin lay perfectly still in the tall grass. She could hear everything. The shouting, the engines still sputtering from the wrecked trucks, the sharp metallic clicks of rifles being loaded. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared the soldiers might hear it. She slowly raised her head just enough to see over the hedge. German troops were already spreading into the fields. They were closer than she expected. Much closer. The wheat around her suddenly felt very thin. If they walked directly toward the hedgerow, they would find her within seconds. Simone forced herself to think. The resistance fighters had warned her about moments like this. Never run blindly. Never panic. Use the terrain. She glanced to her right. A narrow irrigation ditch cut through the field about 30 meters away, partially hidden by tall grass. If she could reach it, she might crawl along it without being seen. But getting there meant moving through open wheat. And several soldiers were already walking in that direction. One of them paused suddenly. He bent down and picked something up from the dirt path. A bicycle tire mark. "Fresh," he called to the others. Their heads turned. They began following the track straight toward the hedgerow. Toward Simone. Her breathing slowed. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But she knew if she moved too early, the wheat would ripple and give her away. The soldiers were now only 20 meters away. One lifted his rifle, scanning the field carefully. Another pushed through the wheat with slow, deliberate steps. 10 meters. Simone's fingers dug into the soil beneath her. 5 meters. Then suddenly, a distant engine roared from the road. All the soldiers turned their heads. Another German vehicle was arriving from the direction of Brest, racing toward the destroyed bridge. An armored car. It screeched to a halt near the wreckage as officers jumped out to assess the disaster. The sergeant shouted something urgently. All nearby soldiers were called back toward the road. Within seconds, the men searching the field began retreating. They ran toward the bridge to help secure the area and report the attack. Simone remained frozen in place, barely daring to breathe. Slowly, the soldiers disappeared back toward the road. The wheat field fell quiet again. Only the distant crackle of flames and shouting at the bridge remained. Simone waited another full minute before moving. Then she crawled carefully through the grass toward the irrigation ditch. Once inside it, she began slowly working her way through the field, disappearing completely from sight. Behind her, German officers were already realizing the scale of what had just happened. Dozens of officers killed, communications equipment destroyed, and a resistance attack carried out right under their noses. But what they did not know yet was that the person responsible was not an experienced saboteur, not a trained soldier, just a 14-year-old girl with a bicycle. And before the war was over, her name would become one of the most feared among the occupying forces. August 20th, 1943, late afternoon, the countryside outside Brest. The irrigation ditch was muddy and cold, but Simone Segouin barely noticed. She crawled slowly through the narrow trench, pulling her bicycle behind her 1 careful meter at a time. Tall grass bent over the ditch, forming a natural tunnel that hid her from the open fields. Her hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, from adrenaline. Behind her, the black smoke from the destroyed convoy still rose into the sky like a signal fire. German soldiers were swarming the road now. Trucks had begun arriving from nearby garrisons. Officers shouted orders while medics dragged wounded men away from the burning wreckage. Even from hundreds of meters away, Simone could hear their anger. The explosion had not just destroyed trucks. It had destroyed communications equipment, officers, and detailed defense plans meant for the Atlantic coast. In one single blast, the French resistance had crippled an entire command convoy. And the Germans knew it. They also knew something else. This was not a random accident. This was sabotage. Nearly 30 minutes later, Simone finally reached the end of the ditch where it met a small dirt farm road hidden behind a line of oak trees. She climbed out carefully and wiped mud from her arms. The bicycle wheels were coated in thick dirt now. Perfect. No one would recognize the tracks she had left earlier. She climbed back onto the seat and began pedaling slowly along the quiet farm road as if nothing had happened. The sun was beginning to dip lower over the fields. Farmhouses stood silent in the distance. Chickens wandered across the road. To anyone watching, she looked exactly like what she appeared to be, a teenage girl riding home from errands. But inside her mind, the images replayed again and again. The explosion, the trucks flipping, the shockwave ripping the bridge apart. She had known the plan could kill German soldiers. But seeing it happen was different, real, deadly. She wondered briefly how many had been inside the convoy. 10? 20? More? Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice. Simone! She looked up. Standing beside a barn near the road was a tall resistance fighter she recognized immediately. Marcel, the same man who had handed her the explosive that morning. He hurried toward her, eyes wide with disbelief. You're alive. Simone stopped the bicycle. You didn't think I would be? She asked calmly. Marcel shook his head slowly. We heard the explosion from 5 kilometers away. Several other resistance members emerged cautiously from the barn behind him. One of them pointed toward the rising smoke far away. Did you do that? Simone glanced back at the distant black column on the horizon. Yes. The group stared at her in stunned silence. Marcel let out a slow breath. That convoy carried officers from Coastal Command, he said quietly. He looked at the smoke again. You may have just eliminated half the regional staff. Another fighter laughed in disbelief. With a bicycle. Simone leaned the bicycle against the barn wall. It worked. Marcel studied her face carefully. There was no excitement in her expression. No celebration. Just calm focus. The look of someone who understood what war really meant. He nodded slowly. Then it won't be your last mission. Simone met his eyes. I know. Over the next months, the legend of the girl with the bicycle quietly spread among resistance fighters across the region. German convoys avoided rural bridges. Officers became suspicious of abandoned bicycles. But the attacks continued. Sabotage, ambushes, disappearing messengers. And increasingly, one name appeared again and again in resistance reports. Simone. Eventually, the young girl would stop using the bicycle altogether. She would carry a rifle, wear a captured German uniform, and fight openly against the occupation. By the time Allied forces finally began pushing into France in 1944, the teenage resistance fighter who once planted bombs beneath bridges had become something else entirely. A soldier. And when American troops finally liberated the region, they would meet the teenage girl who had spent the entire war fighting Nazis. the girl whose innocent bicycle had once destroyed an entire convoy of officers. Her name was Simone Segouin, and she was only 14 when it all began.